Sergio Leone's 1968 Western epic film Once Upon a Time in the West is a bit of a victory lap after concluding an ambitious and successful trilogy of films with A Fistful of Dollars in 1964, For a Few Dollars More in 1965, and ultimately with the highly stylized auteur magnum opus of the early spaghetti western genre, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in 1966. His success in Italy and overseas afforded him the opportunity to attempt a film in scope larger than any of his previous movies. As is the case with many fourth films in directors' filmographies, Once Upon a Time in the West is the culmination of a connected trilogy of their first three films, as well as a metatextual and self-referential work which is aware of the expectations of a directorial style established by those three prior titles. See also Steven Spielberg with Raiders of the Lost Ark, which combines the suspense filmmaking of Jaws with the supernatural and wonderment elements of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, with the World War II-based setting and comedy pastiche of 1941. See also Quentin Tarantino with Kill Bill, which combines the style, dialogue, and violence of Reservoir Dogs with the non-linear format and idiosyncratic characters found in Pulp Fiction with the female-centric perspective of Jackie Brown. Leone does this most blatantly and most brilliantly in the opening of the film, where a gang of assassins take over a train station and wait for the engine to arrive in a very prolonged scene. One can imagine the criticism leveled against the extended sequences of squinted eyes and unholstered guns with nearby fingertips at the ready to draw. While some may have found these portions of his films tedious and without purpose, it is evident that over time he began to use this technique more and more frequently. This is likely done to heighten and maximize suspense, rewarding the patient viewer with a cathartic conclusion more satisfying than it would have been if it had been trimmed down or shorter. The nearly 15-minute, essentially dialogue-free opening is the most audacious example of this method of suspense filmmaking, and I would argue that it is as much a self-aware, almost satire of his utilization of the technique in other films as it is a vindication and defense against any of those earlier critics of such a style of direction or editing. Add to this a level of realism, or at least as real can get in the operatic canvases of Leone's films, made available by authentic American actors provided by Paramount Pictures who financed the film, who give the equally credible and detailed set design and costumes a genuine Western feel, in contrast to the clearly Spanish-Italian feels of those earlier movies. Like many other films made in Italy around the era of Once Upon a Time in the West, the film was shot without sound and later sonically built from the ground up in post-production, with all of the actors' lines being overdubbed later, usually by different people. This gives Leone the freedom to choose actors based solely off of their physicality and form, which allows him to use visual shorthand for characterizations. Take for instance the female lead, Claudia Cardinale, whose beauty and charming screen presence helps the audience better sympathize with her character. For the rugged and silent cold-blooded killer out for revenge, Leone chose Charles Bronson's beaten, leathery face with that traumatized, thousand-yard stare apparent in his hunter eyes. One face he uses better than any, and you can't miss them with all of the trademark extreme close-ups, is Henry Fonda's as the central villain character, Frank. Fonda, who had up until this point only taken acting roles with clearly heroic and moral sweeps, always playing the good guy as a vigilante cowboy, a president, a war hero, or a juror who saves an innocent's life, is cast as a heartless killer who is first introduced to the audience in a scene where he has an entire family massacred before shooting a child survivor. The subversive character type of Fonda's portrayal in this film in relation to the rest of his filmography is a tool Leone uses to add to the shock a contemporary audience member would have felt having first seen him on screen doing such horrible things. Another horrible deed of Frank's which the audience is shown is the sadistic manner in which Harmonica was forced to take part in his brother's death at the hands of Frank many years ago. The harmonica, as a representation of Bronson's character and tragic past, is established not only in the film as a prop seen in flashbacks in current day, but also as a motif in the soundtrack. Using a specific instrument to denote a specific character is something composer Ennio Morricone had done in previous collaborations with Leone, most iconically in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. However, the diegetic reincorporation of the instrument into this story is the more effective and dynamic example of this technique. The exaggerated sound design, due in part to the aforementioned method of shooting without synchronous sound, and in part to a potentially genre-conscious homage to other spaghetti western films, blends with the soundtrack also in the repetitive whistling and thumping of locomotives, which serves as another central image of the movie. These considerations were made possible in the first place by Leone's unorthodox request for Morricone to compose the score before any of the film was shot. The American cut of this film, as with other Leone films, was inevitably shortened before release, removing many integral scenes from the original version, including considerably the most important for paying off the tragic arc of the character Cheyenne, his death scene. Once Upon a Time in the West established the style which Sergio Leone had been cultivating over his last three films, while setting a precedent for the scope and maturity of his later masterpiece, Once Upon a Time in America.